Welcome, everybody. It's another installment of the Combat Press Midweek Report. My name is Riley Contact, here with you always, being joined, as usual, with my partner in crime in his sophomore outing here, Matt Quiggins. Matt, how's it going tonight?
Pretty good. How you doing, man?
Always doing well. On the show tonight, we have a lot of stuff to talk about, actually, and most of it coming in the recent hours before this broadcast. We'll have a recap of UFC 183, which took place on Saturday from Las Vegas, with the headliner Anderson Silva versus Nick Diaz. We also have some breaking news about something that happened in the aftermath of that fight. We'll talk about the main card and a few other bouts on that one. We'll also talk about going forward, the preview for this weekend. We have a lot of regional MMA. And most of the big promotions are sitting out. Bellator, World Series of Fighting, and UFC are all off for the weekend, so we will talk about Resurrection Fighting Alliance, Tachi Palace fights, Cage Fury Fighting Championships, as well as some kickboxing with Glory 19. We'll run down some more news items for you, and as usual, go to our Wrestling Minute. Now, before we jump into it, I encourage you to go to combatpress.com and read the awesome articles there. Interviews, news, opinion pieces, we got everything there. All right, that's combatpress.com, and follow them on Twitter at combatpress. All right, Matt, let's jump right into it. UFC 183, it was headlined by a super fight, if you will, in the middleweight division between Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz. Silva comes away with a unanimous decision in a very, very weird fight, as you were putting it to me before we came on the broadcast. So what were your thoughts on that fight? And don't even get to the news piece yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. But your thoughts on the fight and how it went.
I mean, it was pretty interesting to see someone taunt. You got two fighters who are known for taunting during a fight. Obviously, we expected Diaz to do that. I mean, there was no question about that. The fact that Anderson didn't play into any of it, and really, I don't want to say played it safe, but he really did everything he could to win it without taking really any risks, in my opinion. And obviously, seeing Nick Diaz lay down for him was pretty entertaining as well.
Yeah, it was a very, very interesting fight in that regards. I was mentioning before we got on the air, I did fall asleep before it actually came on, but I did watch the highlights, and it wasn't the most engaging fight, it looked like, but it did look like it wasn't short on hilarity, as you were putting it, the way that Diaz was taunting and how he was acting in the cage with his usual antics. So Silva takes a unanimous decision victory. However, in the aftermath of the fight, we found out in the hour leading up to this show that both Anderson Silva and Nick Diaz failed separate drug tests. Anderson Silva failed two pre-fight drug tests for two different types of anabolic steroids. Diaz failed a post-fight drug test for marijuana, nothing new for him. So what do we make of all this, Matt?
It tarnishes the fight. It really does. I mean, you had a fight that had it taken place maybe 2 years ago, before Anderson lost his belt. I mean, it would have had a little bit more weight to it, but now you have a fighter who, up to this point, had never tested positive, as far as I know. Or if he did, we would know about it. And then you have another fighter who fails consistently. I mean, I don't think anyone is surprised that Nick Diaz failed for marijuana. I really don't.
Right. And now that I'm thinking about it, we're not surprised that Diaz failed. Because he's done it before, and he even said he was not going to change his lifestyle around fighting, which is obviously to his detriment financially because he is going to get fined.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that this is going to tarnish the legacy of Anderson Silva? Because now it puts doubt in the minds of everybody. Sure, he passed drug tests before that, but maybe he was cycling off of it before the test came, or maybe he wasn't even getting pre-fight drug tests. Do you think this affects him in any way?
I don't know if we want to go back that far. I mean, I think what happened was, I think he may have rushed back. I mean, he had a pretty severe, obviously horrifying injury with his leg being broken, shattered, in just a grotesque way. So having him come back, I mean, it was fairly quick. I mean, a little over a year, So I don't think it puts any more doubt into his previous fights. I just think he probably wasn't as cautious this time around because he might not have been 100%.
That was the first thing that came to my mind as well. The horrific leg injury. He competed like a year and a month after he broke his leg. And it wasn't just a break. It was a complete snapping of the shin, which is grotesque. And there's guys that don't come back from that injury. So the first thing that came to my mind was he needed something to get back in the game, and that's why he was using it. Not saying that's right. Obviously, it's not right. But I'm thinking that's the reason because, it's like you, I don't think it tarnishes his legacy. Obviously, that's his first drug test failure, and he fights a lot in places where drug testing is pretty consistent. So, outside of maybe Japan, where we all know the drug testing back in the day was not the most solid, but he's been in the UFC for a long time, so, one has to think that he's been tested pretty well, and we have to blame it on the injury, although that's not an excuse for what happened. Going forward, what happens with Silva and Diaz's career in your mind?
I mean, Weidman keeps saying it, and I'm probably going to agree with Weidman. And Anderson has even said his kids want him to stop fighting. I don't think he has anything left to prove to anybody. I really don't. He's beaten people who fought a weight class below him now. Well, if this gets turned over to no contest, it'll be a little different. But he's beaten people in higher weight classes. He has nothing else to prove. I think, honestly, I would have liked to see him go out with a win, but I think it might be time to hang up the gloves.
What about Nick Diaz?
I think Nick Diaz is going to tell everybody he's going to retire and just sit in the wings until he gets the fight that he wants. I mean, you have a guy who lost a title eliminator, gets a title shot, loses that, and then gets a fight with, arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time. So, Nick's playing the money game, and, I'd love, like we talked about before, I'd love to see him fight Condit again. I really would.
Yeah, and then I was going to bring that up as well before the show. We were talking about maybe another Carlos. I think that would be, if there was a fight to pull him out of, again, his little mini retirement, that would be the one based on how he thought he won the initial meeting and how I think he does have a desire for some closure there. But I think, a lot of people are calling for Silva's retirement, and again, like you, I want him to go out on a win. I would love to see him get one more opportunity. And I still think he does have some gas left in the tank. But, we don't want to see him go down the road of a Chuck Liddell or somebody who just starts losing and losing after the peak of his career. So, again, he's going to have some time off, obviously, due to this injury, or not injury, the failed drug test. Yeah. But we'll have to see where he goes. Again, he actually kind of did make it sound like it could have been his last fight. But, again, yeah, I could totally see Nick Diaz coming back. He made $500,000 to show for this fight on Saturday night. So obviously he's in good financial standing right now, but if he's going to be able to consistently make that kind of money plus pay-per-view points and stuff like that, there's no way, especially a businessman like himself who's very, show me the money like that, there's no way he's going to stay away from the cage.
And I mean, look at what Anderson pocketed just from what we know.
Right. Yeah, he made, I think, $600 to show plus another $200 to win. Plus, he has pay-per-view points. I mean, if I had to take a guess, and this is a generous guess, he walked away with at least $2.5 million that night, and I guarantee you it was probably even more than that. Because
so how much of that does he lose then?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it would be, I'm not 100% sure. It might be 25%. I'm not 100% sure, but I mean, even so, I have heard some rumors about his bank, and he is very, very healthy financially wise. So, I mean, he really doesn't need to fight anymore anyways. So, I mean, he can just be an ambassador to the sport and enjoy his retirement, in my opinion. Moving forward, we go to the co-main event of the evening. We have an interesting fight it was supposed to be the welterweight division, but it was a 180-pound catchweight fight between Tyron Woodley and a heavy Kelvin Gastelum. That fight, was another one I fell asleep for. It was after the Lozon-Iaquinta fight I fell asleep. From what I heard, not a very engaging fight, not the most exciting fight, which, it's not, I didn't think it would be either anyways. But, Matt, give us your opinion on that fight and what you saw.
Well, knowing now that Woodley fought with a broken foot from the first round on, kind of makes sense. But at the same time, it was a split decision. There were some people who scored at 30-27 across the board for Woodley. Others gave Gastelum 2 of the rounds. But like you said, it really wasn't an engaging fight. I mean, the broken foot probably had a lot to do with it, but at the same time, it didn't seem like either guy really wanted it,
Yeah, and That's from what I heard and from the highlights I saw. With Tyron Woodley, you're really going to have two fights in the begin with. You're going to have a very prodding, grinding-like fight, or you're going to have a quick knockout finish. That's really the only two kind of fights he has. And Gastelum has never been accused of having a very deep gas tank. Again, he's either going to overwhelm you quickly or grind you out for 3 rounds. So you add in the fact that he had a very tough weight cut, didn't make weight, and was definitely not 100% going into the fight. And that was just a recipe for disaster for that fight. And then, of course, you say Woodley breaks his foot in 3 or 4 places in the first round. It was bound to fail at that point.
Well, and the fact that Gastelum was in the hospital the day before.
Right, yeah, and then like I said, he even said he wasn't 100% after that weight cut and all the problems he had getting down. So and now we talk about it. He was one of 2 guys to miss weight. Obviously, he missed it much worse. He missed it by, we'll say, 9 pounds because they give you the allotment. He's going back to the middleweight division. Dana White has said it. Where do you do with him in the middleweight division at this point? Do you give him a top 15 opponent or do you break him back in?
You give him CM Punk.
Really?
No. No. I don't know where you put him because, he was doing fairly well at welterweight. He was able to overpower guys because he was a big 170. Obviously that showed with a bad weight cut, but I don't know where to put him. I mean, that really puts him in a top. I'd definitely give him a top 15, but I'm curious to see how he's gonna weigh in at 185 if he's still gonna have the ability to overpower somebody.
Right, and we saw when he fought Uriah Hall, there was times where he did kind of ragdoll him on the ground. I kind of actually just thought of this on the run. I'm thinking the top 15 of the middleweight division right now is very active. They're scheduled to fight. There's not a whole bunch of guys that are hanging out waiting for fights. But there is one guy who would be a very interesting opponent for a Kelvin Gastelum, given his style and his experience, and I think a Brad Tavares fight would be a very, very interesting fight for Kelvin Gastelum because Tavares has a pretty good takedown defense and very good striking, and Gastelum's a wrestler that has some, looking pretty solid boxing for striking. So, I think that'd be a very interesting fight, kind of, test the waters, because he hasn't been at middleweight in a few fights, and, you don't want to throw him back in. But again, even if you did throw him back in, there's not a lot of guys that are available right now to take a fight. So that was just one that came to my head.
Not a bad idea either. I mean, wouldn't be the most exciting fight, but I think it could be a good fight.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not about excitement. You try to make the most exciting matchups, but sometimes you have to make the matchups that make sense, despite how possibly not exciting they'll be. Case in point, Woodley versus Gastelum. I don't think too many people expected that to be a barn burner. I, for one, did not.
No.
But it's just an interesting style of match, and they're both top 25 guys at 185. So I think that's the match you have to make going forward. They're both coming off victories, I'm sorry, they're not both coming off victories. But you don't have to factor that in because Gastelum has been on a big tear. That was his first loss of his career. So yeah. I think it makes sense in that sense, but there's so many options at middleweight now because you have since Silva lost the belt, it has opened up the title picture and has made more guys available to fight, and it makes more options for matchups. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that fight. Obviously, it was kind of marred. We go to the lightweight division, and we had a very, very one-sided type fight. Something that I would have kind of foreseen coming at this point in the game. A couple years ago, it would have been a different story. We had Al Iaquinta taking on Joe Lauzon, and Al Iaquinta continues to show why he's one of the top lightweight prospects going forward. And actually, he might not even be a prospect after that fight because he seems to be in the top 25 after knocking out Joe Lauzon. In my opinion, Joe Lauzon is probably a little bit over the hill. He was always more exciting than he was skilled. He's a very good grappler who has sustainable boxing, but he's always been that guy that's there to add excitement to a card. He's never really there was a time where he was a contender for a little bit, but that kind of faded away the more he took on top competition. Now, what were your thoughts on that fight, and where do you see Al Iaquinta's ceiling being at?
Well, I mean, to be honest, that was nearly a one-sided beating, and that fight may have gotten stopped a little too late. I don't want to go on, another weekend of,
Sure.
late stoppages, but really, you could see. I don't know if I'm the only one who caught it. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but Joe Lozon looked at the ref like, thanks, like
Yeah,
that was enough.
you're absolutely right there. And I hate to say it, but Lozon's another one he's just taken so much damage in his career because he is such a reckless fighter that at some point it's just like, when is he gonna realize that you can't keep fighting like that? And that, I don't want to insinuate, I don't want to tell guys to retire or not. It's not
No.
my decision to make. It's their decision to make. So, but it comes to a point where you see Joe Lozon taking some pretty serious beatings in his last few fights. That bloodbath with Jim Miller was an absolute wrecking. The loss to Michael Johnson was incredibly one-sided.
Gosh, that wasn't even a fight.
Exactly, and actually last week I think I compared this fight to that Michael Johnson fight and how I thought it was going to go, and I wasn't wrong. So, just you're right though. I did see that after the stoppage, Lozon kind of tapped him like, "Thank you," like I needed that, and it was kind of big. But now there's no rest for the wicked. Al Iaquinta, it was announced yesterday, which is about 2 days after UFC 183. He's going to be making a turnaround in April. With Benson Henderson moving to that Colorado card for the main event against Brandon Thatch, it left Jorge Masvidal without an opponent. Now that opponent's going to be Al Iaquinta. What are your thoughts on that fight?
I mean, that's going to be a tough fight for him, really. Not so much stylistically, but I mean, Jorge Masvidal has been around for a while. I mean, he's got a wealth of experience, and he's just going to be another. He might just be another notch on Iaquinta's belt, depending on how his body and how his mental is going into this fight, 3 months later.
Yeah, and the thing is like I said, I'm a huge proponent of Al Iaquinta. I knew him before he came on The Ultimate Fighter, how good he was. He disappointed a little bit on the show, but it's The Ultimate Fighter is not about who's the best fighter. It's who is peaking at that time. Yeah. Because if you look at it, a lot of the guys that won were not the guys that ended up being the best. So I had some faith that he'd come back after the show and do well, and he has done that, and he has become a legitimate lightweight contender. Here's the thing I don't like about this fight is he's taking it very quickly, which is fine. He didn't take much damage in the Lozon fight, but it's against a guy who is a stylistic nightmare for a lot of guys in this division because of his improved counter wrestling and his chin and his striking. He is a very well-rounded guy, as Masvidal, and if you don't have a full training camp for him, if you're taking a late-notice fight with him, it's going to be a very tough fight. So the reason I don't like it is because it's kind of, if Iaquinta loses, which I haven't made a prediction yet, I'll make a prediction when we get closer. If he loses, it kind of takes the wind out of his sails a little bit after knocking around Ross Pearson and Joe Lozon. So it's kind of I would have much preferred actually if the UFC would have given Donald Cerrone to Jorge Masvidal, because it would have been a fight of the night contender, and it takes two guys towards the top of the division and gives them something that would be an important fight for both men.
Well, I mean, and that being said, how would you have felt if Henderson stayed against Masvidal?
I would have been fine with that, honestly. I don't like the fact. I listen. I appreciate he stepped up for this card that's going to be actually next weekend because they needed a fight. But Brandon Thatch is one of your best welterweight prospects, and you're going to put him in the octagon in his third UFC fight with a former UFC and WEC lightweight champion, and I don't know how I feel about that. It's gonna experience, but it's also gonna kind of take the hype away a little bit if he doesn't win. And if he does win, that's amazing, and he'll be a welterweight contender right off the bat. But it's just, again, it's taking one of your most experienced, world-class fighters and putting him against a guy who's really just trying to carve his teeth right now.
Well, and to make that same point, if he does beat Ben Henderson, he beats Ben Henderson at a weight class that Ben has never fought at.
Right.
I don't really think it holds as much weight as if he beat him at 155.
That's true, but you also have to think that Benson Henderson has talked about moving to 170 pounds in the past. Sure. He thinks that the weight cut to 155 is eventually just not going to be good for him, which I think a lot of fighters are figuring out at this point. That was mentioned on Saturday as well, and I agreed with Joe Rogan on that. But I think that will be his home in the near future. But it's just really a no-win situation for the UFC there. Your top prospect loses, or your former lightweight champion is on he loses, and he's on a big losing streak. And to be honest, a lot of the decisions that he won in the past, I don't think he won either. So if you look at his record, he could really have in reality a very losing record.
Yeah.
But that's the topic for a whole different night, obviously. But
all right, middleweight division.
Middleweight division, yes. The next fight was an interesting fight. It was the fight of the night, and I actually kind of agreed. It was pretty entertaining. Tim Boetsch versus Thales Leites. It was kind of the tale of two rounds there. In the first round, Tim Boetsch, got his striking going a little bit, and then in the second round, Leites was able to actually secure the takedown and get his world-famous arm triangle choke. Matt, your thoughts on that fight and the finish, which, if you remember, Boetsch actually broke out of the first arm triangle and then got caught in another one. So what were your thoughts?
What I love was jiu-jitsu at its finest right there. It really was, because Boetsch did everything he needed to do to get out of that first one, and Leites just went, okay, I'm just going to move to the other side, and I don't think Boetsch was prepared for that at all. I think that was really close to being another Boetsch Okami, where he had that comeback, because he was nailing Leites with everything he had, and having that mental capacity that Leites had to be like, recompose himself, secure that takedown, and get the submission win was just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, that was they won fight of the night, so that's $50,000 to both men. And then Leites won the performance of the night for that arm triangle choke, which again you can't argue with that. That was the thing of beauty. I remember watching it, I'm like, and I kind of realized it like subconsciously. I'm like, wait a minute, did he just jump to the other side and do an arm triangle on the other side?
Yep.
And then they showed it on the replay, and I was just like, I was taken back for a second. I was like, that was insane.
Yeah.
And again, Leites is a guy, when you get on the ground with him, you don't want to spend much time with him there, because he really is a world-class jiu-jitsu guy, especially in the middleweight division. And I think we talked about that in the pre-fight. Obviously I took Boetsch and you took Leites. But we said if Boetsch gets on his back, he's going to be in big trouble. I thought he had the wrestling to take it off, but he didn't. So, that was, in my opinion, it was actually the fight of the night. And in my opinion, it's early in the year, a candidate for submission of the year just based on what happened, because it was such an impressive arm triangle choke. Yeah,
based upon the lead-up of it just alone, because usually you'll see so many fighters who will continually go for the same side and keep trying, just like somebody who grabs a guillotine and keeps squeezing even though they don't have it and they burn out. That it was just absolute, beautiful.
Yes, and just a great pay-per-view fight on a card that really needed to have a few fights that were worth watching, and that one really came through. Moving on to the opener, this will be the last one we talk about in depth. The opener was a welterweight bout between Jordan Meehan and Thiago Alves, and I will tell you, this was another one I really, really enjoyed. I love me some jiu-jitsu, but I love me some striking as well, and this had all the striking you could have asked for. The first round, obviously Jordan Meehan was getting the better of the exchanges. He was nailing some nice standing elbows. His combinations were more fluid, but Thiago Alves, they call him the Pitbull for a reason. He came back strong in the second round and just absolutely flattened Meehan with some awesome strikes, and ended up finishing him with some follow-up punches. What was your thoughts? There was a controversy about a knee at the end. I don't think it had any sway in the fight and the decision. But what was your thoughts on the fight as a whole?
Well, it's really funny, sitting there watching the fight with a couple of friends and us talking about it. And then after that first round, one of my friends had actually stated, we think we need to take that Pitbull nickname away from him, because he doesn't seem to have that same killer instinct that he did. And then he comes out in the second, and he just wrenches that body kick. And, I mean, the GIFs on the internet are hysterical. The knee, I think, hit him. I think it did almost graze the shoulder, might have hit him in the head. Do I think that caused the end of the fight? Absolutely not. I mean, that he was down from that kick. I mean, the ref could have easily stopped it from there. So I don't think that had anything to do with the outcome of the fight.
Yeah, I don't either. I think at that point, Meehan, he was so hurt to the body, which he should have been. That kick was wicked, and there's not many guys that kick harder than Thiago Alves. I mean, the guy is just a horse. But yeah, the knee, if it did hit him, it grazed him, and I don't think you'd get an argument from Jordan Meehan. I think he would agree that he got.
Yeah.
So it was a fun fight because Alves was getting picked apart in the first round, and it didn't look good. And
Yeah.
obviously some of that could have been ring rust. He hasn't been able to stay active, so
Yeah. I mean,
it was good
his
to see
last
him
fight
get back.
was April of last year.
Yeah, exactly. He struggled with injuries, and it's good to see him back because he's a guy that the UFC needs, a guy that they can put on a card and you can get an exciting fight out of him 9 out of 10 times.
What I
And
did love was Mean throwing those elbows because it reminded me of Faber, Faber and Mike Brown when he broke his hand. They were just beautifully timed, and not anybody could just pull that off. So props to him for that.
yeah, and again, I was saying that was other than the body kick, the most impressive thing because he nailed about a half dozen, if not more, just beautifully timed standing elbows that they weren't just for cutting. He was trying to hurt him with those. He was
Yeah.
trying to knock him out with standing elbow strikes. So yeah, just another great fight. On a card that was the early goings was much more exciting than the later goings, and I think
Yeah.
you could agree with that. All right, we're gonna each talk about one prelim here. That we were excited for and we thought came through or we had some thoughts on. So, Matt, what was the one prelim that you'd like to discuss?
I'm gonna have to go with our weight issue, John Lineker and Ian McCall. Lineker came in, since we have the 1 pound allotment, 4 pounds overweight, and for smaller guys like that, that's a big deal. But it's especially a big deal for him since he's missed weight 4 times.
Yep.
And after this, he has to fight at bantamweight. Dana White hasn't really given him a choice. I think if he had gone out there and had a solid performance, in exciting and dominating, I think it would have been a completely different story. But he's going to be moving up to 135. I mean, McCall seemed to have it in that first round. He was working what he did, but I think he got a little overzealous. I mean, he even said before the fight he wanted to finish it. He didn't want to do it before, and I think he just kept going for that takedown and kept getting caught in that guillotine, which he got out of both times. So credit to him for that.
It was wicked tight too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one thing that I can say about Lineker's grappling. Obviously, the takedown defense is improved, but he does have a very good guillotine, and if you've watched tape on him before, that's definitely something I have seen. Is he does have a very good guillotine choke. But props to Ian McCall for getting out of those because those were wicked, and he stayed very calm and very patient and got out of them methodically. But yeah, so Lineker is moving up to 135 now. Is there a fight off the top of your head that you'd like to see Lineker take in his return to 135?
Well, I know somebody who wants to fight him, and we were talking about this before the show, whether or not that would be relevant. I'm still going to throw it out there just because there's a little personal beef here. You've got Tim Elliott, who fights Zach Makovsky next weekend, but he feels, when he fought John Dodson, that Lineker took his money for fight of the night. So he wants to fight Lineker at 135. He said he doesn't care. He'll move up. He goes, but he kind of wanted some retribution for taking his money and stealing the show.
Interesting. Yeah, he's a flyweight and he's got something to deal with next weekend, but we'll see what happens with that. The fight I wanted to talk about, which ended up being a pretty good one and very entertaining, was we'll call the headliner of the prelims, Miesha Tate versus Sarah McMahon. Again, a tale of two sides of the fight. In the beginning, you have Sarah McMahon absolutely crippling Miesha Tate with a huge punch. Looked like she could have finished it in the first round. Miesha recovered and kind of just held on for the first round. But Tate's a very slow starter, and we've seen that in the past in some of her other fights. But she came back in the second and third round and not only out-wrestled Sarah McMahon, out-grappled her thoroughly and did a very good job. And at this point, and I don't know how many people are wanting to see it, but I would watch it every day of the week. Miesha Tate really, really looks like one of the few ladies that's going to come forward and fight Ronda Rousey for the title, assuming that she wins against Kat Zingano. There's really just not many contenders at this point, and Miesha has given her the most competition of anybody she's faced. They have personal animosity, and she really is one of the best. People think she's overrated, but if you look at her track record, she's beaten Liz Carmouche. She just beat Sarah McMahon. Okay, she's beaten some of the best in the world at 135 pounds and still doesn't get as much respect as she deserves. She is truly the number 3 women's bantamweight, which we published yesterday, the Combat Press women's rankings. And again, she showed why she deserved it last on Saturday against Sarah McMahon. Any thoughts on that fight, Matt?
I mean, you're right, and for Miesha Tate, really, it's a win-win. You know, she broke her orbital in that first round when Sarah threw that, punch.
Yep.
Like you said, I thought the fight was going to be over in that first round. Either way, if she fights the winner of Ronda versus Ngannou, she's got a rematch. She's got unfinished business with both of them. Which fight would sell more? Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate 3. Of course. It's one of the few fights that people would watch a trilogy when one fighter already has 2 wins over the other.
Yep.
That being said, I think Liz Carmouche gave Ronda a really tough fight, even though it only lasted that first round. I think Miesha just took her into the heavier, deeper water, so to speak. But do I think she can beat Ronda? It's possible, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't see too many women in the world in general beating Ronda. But that was UFC 183. Overall, I thought it was a pretty good card. Not a lot of boring fights. There was obviously the Fight Pass. If you watched Ildemar Alcantara and Richardson Mojeda fight, you obviously probably took a nap like I almost did. But for the most part, I thought the fights were very, very good. And the ratings for the prelims were in, and they did, I think, 1.9 million views. So this year, 2015, has been good for UFC ratings thus far on free TV. So it's a very encouraging sign for the company. Now, we are going to go on to a regional preview of 3 MMA cards and a kickboxing card. We'll talk briefly about each one. The first one we're going to talk about is RFA 23. RFA, as many of you know, is kind of like the unofficial feeder program for the UFC. A lot of their really good fighters have gone through that company and had some good success with the company. The card will be headlined by Joe Murphy and Terrion Ware. Murphy is a once-beaten fighter who is considered one of the better prospects in the bantamweight division. Terrion Ware is a California regional prospect who's, I believe, 12-3 and has been in some very, very exciting fights. So, what are your thoughts on this fight, Quiggins?
Well, I mean, like you said, once beaten Joe Murphy, the only guy he's lost to is Carson Beebe, who at one point, was somebody everybody thought was going to make it and really, hit the ranks. It's been a while, but I mean, he's on a 2-fight win streak. I mean, I think Joe Murphy, with his experience, he may take this fight, even though his opponent may have a few more fights than him. But I feel like this is the fight where if he impresses, the UFC is going to be calling. Get one more 135er in there, because with all the injuries we're having, we need, the UFC needs, exciting guys to be on the sideline waiting for their opportunity.
Right, and the thing that I see with this fight, and I agree with you, I think if Murphy gets a win, he's on the list, but I do think he's behind the RFA bantamweight champion, which is Luke Sanders. I think the winner of this would set up a fight with... I'm sorry, say that again?
I said, of course, yeah.
Right, but I think the winner of this fight, I don't think they would go straight to the UFC. I think they would get a look at Luke Sanders in that RFA bantamweight championship, unless Sanders gets called up to the UFC. It all really just depends, but I think it's a very good fight. If Murphy can get past Ware's length and athleticism, which is going to be a big factor, those are the 2 things that Ware has going for him in this fight. I think he can be very successful, and I think he's a very viable bantamweight prospect. So I think RFA's got a good one in Murphy. Just looking at the rest of the cards there, what's one other fight you want to touch on that you are kind of looking forward to?
I mean, I'm not going to pick one because, to be honest, I love seeing these prospects, these guys that have such a chance to impress. And like you said, being the feeder organization unofficially, I'm just excited to see, who's going to come out and who's going to show up.
Sure. When it comes to my mind, because I'm a huge prospects guy, and I mean, I just did a series for which we talked about last week, Bleacher Report. The prospects, the 5 prospects from each weight class the UFC should sign, which did over 93,000 reads. So I want to thank everybody that participated in that, read and promoted. But there's several guys in this card. Ione Barcelos is a very good prospect. I actually thought that he might be included on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil 4, but obviously now it doesn't look like he made the cast. And then, as we were talking about before the telecast, Jocelyn Lieberger is one of the better 115-pound prospects that's not in the UFC, so she'd be an interesting one to watch. And there's a guy that made the Ultimate Fighter 16, which is oftentimes panned as one of the worst seasons of the Ultimate Fighter, but he's a guy that I think is athletic and powerful and has a chance to be a very decent fighter, and that's Dom Waters. So I will be looking at him. He's actually on the untelevised version, so I will have to find a way to try and watch that fight. But definitely a guy that's exciting, and obviously if you can put some wins together, especially in the feeder organization like we talk about, could eventually find his way back to the octagon.
Yeah.
So then we'll talk about Thursday night. Before all that happens, Tachi Pellis Fights 22 comes to you live from Sherdog.com. If you've never checked out a Thursday Tachi Pellis Fights stream from Sherdog, I very much suggest it. TJ DeSantis and Javier Vasquez are on the call, and they do a very nice job. And that promotion in general usually has exciting fights. They don't always have the best fighters. They have some very good fighters, but they're more about exciting fights, and you'll see that a lot of times. The headliner is between Rolando Velasco and Fabiano Conceição. Okay, so that's a very interesting fight. I know I've watched Rolando Velasco in his last few fights. I think he's a very viable prospect. He fights with the Last Stand Fight team, which has produced some solid fighters out in California. So that's going to be a very interesting fight. Conceição comes from Brazil, and he's actually fighting on short notice. But in looking at his record, he fights with the X-Gym, and he does have a very impressive record. So, this isn't going to be a rollover fight for Velasco. He's going to have to work for this one. Other guys that are included on the card, World Series of Fighting veteran Angel Deanda will be there. UFC veteran David Mitchell is who he'll be fighting. There's some other really good guys. There's a 2-0 I believe he's a bantamweight or a featherweight. His name's Castle Williams, who will be competing. He's one of the blue chippers that I want to keep my eye on, along with RFA veteran Boston Sam. And those are two guys in the lighter weight classes that I want to keep your eye on. But Castle Williams does fight on that Tachi Pellis Fights 22 card on Thursday. All right, last one we will talk about is CFFC 45, Cage Fury Fighting Championships out in the East Coast. They got some title fights going on, some very interesting ones. This is another company that's consistently putting on great fights and are sending guys to the octagon as well. There's two title fights that I want to talk about, and I will throw it to you in a second. The first being Lyman Good versus Micah Terrell. All right, the second being Daryl Horcher versus Jordan Steiner. So, which of the two fights are you more excited to watch, and what do you think about these two fights?
Probably Lyman Good. I mean, we haven't. Unless you're watching, you haven't seen much from him as of lately. It's nice to see him, in a title spot. From what I see, it looks like a co-main event. Just exciting to see if he's gonna make it back and stay on that road for wherever he wants to go.
Yeah, Lyman Good is, he had that spot on the Ultimate Fighter after Bellator released him, and obviously he didn't make the Ultimate Fighter. He got a very bad matchup, and he didn't perform well. But since then, he's kind of had like a chip on his shoulder, and he's coming off of a controversial no contest to Jonathan Webb with an eye poke, in a fight many people thought he was winning. And that win would have been huge for him because Jonathan Webb is a very, very respected welterweight out in the East Coast. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a fight to try and make up for that no contest. But yeah, the lightweight main event between Daryl Horcher and Jordan Steiner is an awesome fight. If you guys don't know who either one of these guys are, I beg you to go on YouTube and watch their fights. Daryl Horcher was a guy that I included on that Prospects the UFC Should Sign series. I think he is a very underrated lightweight with a lot to offer. And then Jordan Steiner is a guy who's a little bit less known but very skilled, and a guy that can really give Horcher a lot of problems. So that is a very, very competitive fight and one that you should watch. All right, so that was CFFC. All right, 40. I think I said 45, and that will be coming. I think it's on Saturday night. So check that out. I think it will be on Go Fight Live. Now the last one I want to talk about before we get to anything else here, a little bit of some news from over the weekend, is Glory 19. We're talking a little kickboxing here. I know this is an MMA show, but we are all about the combat sports. Glory 19 taking place from the Hampton Coliseum in Hampton, Virginia. Okay, we have on that card, we have a welterweight contender tournament. We'll have a one-night, four-man tournament. We also have the heavyweight championship bout. and a feature bout in the middleweight division featuring a man who was just in Bellator and put on one of the knockouts of the year. So we'll start at the bottom of the card, the welterweight tournament. Obviously, that'll also headline the card, but we got 4 guys. We got Raymond Daniels taking on Yonatan Oliveira, and then we got Nicky Holzken versus Alexander Stetsurenko. So taking a look at the field, who do you think is the favorite, and who do you think is going to win?
Nicky Holzken, hands down. I mean, watching him fight is like watching magic happen. So, I mean, he's going to have some tough fights ahead of him. I think it's going to end up being Holzken and Daniels, and Holzken coming out with the win for the final.
Yeah, I'm going to go with you on that one. I do think that I think Nicky is one of the best kickboxers in the world, pound for pound. I think he's very skilled. And actually, I think he got the tougher matchup in the semifinal. I think that him and the Russian guy are actually I would have picked to go to the finals if they weren't taking on each other. But yeah, I definitely think Nicky's going to win that fight. You know, I've watched some tape on him, and you know, I saw him in his last Glory fight, and he's the real deal. So I
that fight
expect him
against
to win.
Valentini was insane.
Yeah, and I think he'll win, not with relative ease, but I think he'll make it look easier than it actually is going to be because he does have some decent competition.
Yeah.
The other fight that we're going to talk, we'll talk about a couple fights, but is just a middleweight feature fight between Joe Schilling, who's coming off his Bellator thrashing of Melvin Manhoff, and Robert Thomas. What are your thoughts on this fight, Quiggins?
I think Schilling's going to be on a win high, you know, no pun intended. You know, Nick Diaz. But, I mean, really, you know, coming off that knockout, I think he's going to have all the confidence in the world. And, you know, I think you're going to see him come out with another win and, you know, see him go for that Glory title, you know, sooner than later.
Yeah, this is definitely, I think, a showcase fight for him. No disrespect to his opponent, but Joe Schilling is very, very skilled and powerful. And, you know, I know Melvin Manhoff doesn't exactly have a jaw made of granite, but the way he put him down with that punch, he didn't even land it cleanly, but it was so powerful that he just put him to sleep before he even, you know, before he even started falling backwards. So, yeah, I definitely like Joe Schilling in that fight as well. The last one we have is a heavyweight championship bout featuring the champion Rico Verhoeven and his challenger Errol Zimmerman. What are your thoughts on this fight, and who do you think is going to win?
This is going to be just a trilogy fight for the ages, you know. You've got these guys, they've got a lot of history together. You know, they're 1-1, of course, you know, with Verhoeven getting the last win. You know, but I mean, that was 2 years ago. You know, a lot has changed with both of these fighters, but I mean, Verhoeven's young, he's quick, you know. It's hard to say. I mean, because Zimmerman's just got such an extensive record, you know, so much experience. He has over 100 kickboxing matches, and, you know, I believe 83 of them are wins. So, you know, he's no stranger to that. But that being said, I think Verhoeven's going to take it and, you know, cement his future legacy, you know, being that he's so young.
Yeah, I talked to Combat Press bigwig Rob Tatum today, and, you know, we were talking about this fight, and, you know, he had a very interesting take on it. It was a little bit different than mine, but he's probably a little bit more in tune with the kickboxing world than I am. You know, for my unbelievably nerdy, vast knowledge of MMA, I'm actually not as plugged into the kickboxing community as much. I do watch my fair share, but he says that he thinks Verhoeven is the better fighter, but he thinks that he's got a bit of a big head, and he's coming off of a loss recently. And he says that if Zimmerman's in the gym training like a madman, like he can, he thinks that Zimmerman can actually win this fight. And thinking about that, I kind of agree with him. But that said, I do think if Verhoeven comes in with his head straight, I think he should have this in the bag because, like you said, he's very quick and he's very powerful. And, you know, watching him in the ring in his last few bouts that I've seen him in, he has looked like a heavyweight that's ready to kind of take on superstar status. So I'm going to agree with you. I will take Verhoeven, but I think it'll be a very, very close and interesting fight.
Yeah. Well, that being said, you know, Spike also did the special with Mike Tyson, which I could watch about 15 minutes of before I had to shut it off. So
not good.
I couldn't, you know, all respect to Mike Tyson, but hearing him interview fighters, you know, especially kickboxers, was comedic at best.
I wish I would have seen that then, because I like me some Mike Tyson antics.
I'm sure it's
Um,
on Spike's website.
Oh, I'm gonna definitely check it out after this then. So let's get to one news item before we kind of start wrapping things up here. UFC 184, obviously, we kind of talked about some stuff earlier with UFC 184, but Chris Weidman, the middleweight champion of the UFC, has fallen out from injury with his fight in the headliner against Vitor Belfort, leaving that fight card up in basically Ronda Rousey's capable arms. She will now be filling in the main event. But the big news coming out of that, obviously the biggest news is Weidman got injured, but some even bigger news was the fact that Belfort actually turned down 2 possible fights for the interim title, and I've actually heard he asked for another guy for the interim title who shouldn't have been anywhere near it. Well, of course, I'm referring to him turning down bouts with Lyoto Machida and Gegard Mousasi. I had heard he asked for Mark Munoz for the interim title, which I just saw your reaction in the screen, and I said the same thing. Makes no sense. But what are your thoughts on him turning down the fight and really kind of just, again, log jamming the middleweight division? He had a chance to fight for an interim title, and he's kind of turning it down.
Well, we all know how Vitor's been. You know, he's been trying to get his hands on that gold since UFC 49, 46. You know, when he won it from Randy Couture, you know, by slicing his eyelid open. You know, he's been trying for that gold for, you know, years and years and years. And I think at this point it's just a desperate grasp at, you know, he wants the title. He feels he's earned it. And, you know, he probably doesn't have that much time left in the fight game, even though he looks like he is in better shape and, you know, more capable than he ever has been, you know, since his early days.
Yeah, you know that, but you know the way he's going about it is a little bit like
I don't agree with you.
Yeah, no, I don't either. And you know, I believe who said it? Ric Flair or Bret Hart said to be the best, you got to beat the best.
Mm-hmm.
And if Chris Weidman's the best and he's not able to go, you got to go with who's next best. And in my mind, that is Lyoto Machida. So the fact that he's not taking that fight, not only would he get a top fighter and a chance to win gold like he's been craving, but he keeps his slot in a high-profile pay-per-view. I'm sure he makes pay-per-view points as well. I don't know how much money of an issue for him is, but you know, all that considered, it's really in my mind foolish. But and then you know, I had heard this from other people that he said I'll take on Munoz for the interim title. Really was a head scratcher. It's like, really, you're going to go for a guy who hasn't, you know, won a notable fight in a few years here for the interim title? It really just sounds like you want to be handed the title, and it's kind of almost like a sense of entitlement that I'm sensing from him as well.
Yeah, no pun intended, entitlement.
Yeah, thank you.
But no, and I agree. But at the same time, I mean, the way he's going about it just makes him look, I don't want to say stupid, but you know,
makes him look bad.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no other way to put it. He really does look bad in this whole situation because he's turning down fights for an interim title, which if he wins, like he's supposed to think he can do, he's going to combine that with a title shot against the guy he was supposed to take on in the first place.
And then,
so it really doesn't make sense.
I don't want to jinx it, but I'm going to throw this out there. Had he had the, you know, if he's given the chance to win the interim title and Weidman's not able to recover.
He's the champ.
Yeah.
Right, and I didn't even think of that, and that's an even better point. So the way he's going about it, he's basically saying, like, it's my way or the highway, and that's really that sense of entitlement I was kind of just saying. Like, where does he get this? Where does he come off with this? You're not the champion. You don't call the shots.
I expect that from a 22-year-old kid who's fighting in the UFC. I don't expect that from a veteran of the sport who's been around as long and knows how things work. But maybe that's where I'm wrong. You know, he's a guy who knows how things work, and he's not going to jeopardize his title shot like he's seen so many fighters before. You know, I don't agree with him, but his logic isn't completely flawed.
Yeah, but you know, he knows how, but he should know how the game works. So, you know, he can't call the shots. He's not the champion. Unless you're the champion, you don't call shit. So, you know, I mean, you don't get to just say you're going to do this and you're going to do that, because he's going to screw himself out of a title shot. Weidman's going to come back, and the matchmaker's going to be like, well, he sat around all this time, and there's other guys fighting that are ready to go. Yeah. You know, Jacare, the winner of Rockhold Machida. Those guys were fighting and they're staying active. They're ready to go. Maybe we put him in the main event slot now, and Vitor, slides down the pole here.
And for the record, I think Machida would beat Belfort. So.
Oh, absolutely. I would take Machida in a heartbeat as well. But I think that's why he doesn't want to fight him. I think he knows he can't beat Machida, and that would be the end basically of his title hopes.
Yeah. And I think that's what he is. He's grasping for that last chance.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's very transparent what he's doing. I just don't think it's the right way to go about it, especially at this point in his career. Yeah. And again, he's going to miss out on a big payday here as well. He could have stayed on UFC 184, made his probably mid six-figure contract plus back-end points on the pay-per-view, and it's not always about a payday, but when you're making that kind of money, you got to take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, that pretty much does it for the MMA portion. I will, as usual, go through it my wrestling minute. I will try not to go off on a tangent like I did last week. The one thing I do want to talk about on Wrestling Minute this week is the main event of Raw, and I thought it was very, very well done. It was a main event between Daniel Bryan and Seth Rollins, who I think should have a feud as soon as possible. If you ever watched their Ring of Honor matches, these guys can put on match of the year after match of the year after match of the year, and they weren't given a lot of time to work on Raw, but they had an unbelievable match in what the time they were given. So, obviously there was big stakes. Whoever wins takes on Roman Reigns at the new pay-per-view Fastlane or whatever it's called, and the winner goes to WrestleMania and whatever. There's obviously some hijinks that go on during the match with Seth Rollins' buddies. Roman Reigns comes out and hits probably the biggest spear I've ever seen in my life on Big Show. I mean, he literally launched himself off the stage and broke him in half. And then he speared, I think it was Joey Mercury as well. And then as the referee was distracted and Seth Rollins was arguing with Roman Reigns outside the ring, Jamie Noble went to try and hit Daniel Bryan with a foreign object, and Daniel Bryan basically threw him out of the ring. And then Reigns, while the referee's back, there's a lot to talk about here. Reigns, while the referee's back was turned, hit a Superman punch on Rollins right into the flying knee from Daniel Bryan. And Daniel Bryan won, so he'll now face Reigns at Fastlane. I thought it was a very, very good main event. Usually Raw and WWE in general have very disappointing main events because they can never have by the books finishes. There's always so much crap going on. But they did two things here that are important. One, they got some of Daniel Bryan's momentum back by getting that win and giving him a match that's very important at Fastlane. And number two, it got some of the pop back on Roman Reigns because the minute he speared the Big Show and helped Daniel Bryan win, the fans loved him. And that is big because they gave him so much resentment after that Royal Rumble loss. So it was really, really important that they tried to build him up this way. Now, they kind of booked themselves into a corner where he's going to have to beat Daniel Bryan, and the fans won't like that again. So, that's kind of the only problem that you have seen come out of this, especially if you want him to be your face of the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I kept it much, much shorter this week because I know Quiggins doesn't want to sit there and listen to me rant about pro wrestling all day.
I told you, man, I grew up on this stuff, and I'm no stranger to it, so.
All right, well, that's good. Well, that about does it, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I think I'm good. Like I said, now we've got an exciting fight with Ronda and Zingano as the headliner. Something we really haven't had since UFC, 157?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the Carmouche-Ronda fight. And not only that, the co-main event is going to be Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington. So you have a main event and a co-main event that are both women.
Which is going to be the first time in UFC history. Again,
right.
Happening in February.
Yep. And Holly Holm is making her UFC debut, world champion boxer and really an undefeated, unstoppable at this point MMA prospect. So, and she's a girl that many people are pegging as a future contender to that Ronda Rousey throne.
Well, let's see her get through Raquel Pennington. Raquel is just a grinder, and, I'm going to use the term bulldog just because I can.
I see what you did there, but yeah, no, definitely. Raquel is a tough cookie, and the way that she in her last fight, I thought Ashley Evans Smith was beating her up pretty good in that first round, and she came back and pulled off that bulldog choke, and right at the buzzer, If it wasn't for that, it would have went to a third round. You never know what would have happened. So she's a gamer, and she steps her game up when she needs to. So you're right. It will not be a walk in the park for Holly Holm, but it'll be a nice gauge as to where she is when it comes to UFC competition.
Oh, absolutely. When we finally get to see her, I don't want to say anything now. We're still a few weeks out. So.
Right.
God.
Right. Well, I think that about does it, Mr. Quiggins. I have a life to go back to, which includes watching old clips of Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn. And that's about it.
Wow.
For the 10 people that probably watch this show, we want to thank you for tuning in with us again for the Combat Press Midweek Report. As always, we tell you to head to combatpress.com for the latest interviews, opinion pieces, predictions, and everything in between. We tell you to follow them on Twitter at Combat Press for, obviously, articles being tweeted out and other thoughts, as well as live coverage of events. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm still very shy of the 1 million mark before my giveaway, but I'm willing to forgive you people if you start following me now. It is at Big Riles MMA. That is at Big Riles MMA. If you want to hear random ramblings about MMA or random thoughts of the day, which once in a while come, and they're usually awesome as usual. If you want to follow Mr. Quiggins on Twitter, that would be at Quiggins MMA. That is at Quiggins MMA. Anything else you want to plug today, Mr. Quiggins?
I think that's it. I'm just excited to see, what's coming up in these next few weeks and, get us back on some, high-level MMA.
I agree. And one of these days you will have to get a Fedora sponsor if this show makes it big. So we'll hope for that in the future. Anyways, that's about it. We'll see you next week, hopefully. I'm sure Mr. Quiggins will be back with me here to talk some MMA and obviously some wrestling at the end of the show. For everybody at Combat Press, including lead editors Rob Tatum and Brian Henderson, I'm Riley Contek. Have fun watching the regional MMA fights this weekend.